If you're watching this video, then the name Vital Lacerda either means nothing or it says everything you need to know. If you're the former, welcome to the world of the unrelentingly overbearing heavy Eurogames, a subgenre of board gaming that takes dry efficiency puzzles and asks the question, what if they're so complicated that understanding how to play is the play? If you're a fan of Lacerda's work, you already know exactly what you're getting. Kanban EV is just a re-implementation of a game you already own, but with a new lick of paint. And if you're not, you already know what you're avoiding. A headache in a box. So, instead of talking about all of that convolution, let's today try and answer the question, what do these mechanisms actually represent? Kanban EV is a simulation of the best humanity can ever achieve, being middle management in a car factory. To some, this setting is a nightmarish depiction of humanity's hubris. To others, it is just a Tuesday. I want to begin with something that I generally avoid doing, showcasing a Kickstarter exclusive component. The Kanban EV Kickstarter campaign came with an optional purchase of a set of metal cars to replace the wooden ones. These are chunky, more detailed, and pleasing to hold. Cars are big, metal, and heavy, and these are big, metal, and heavy. It makes sense. They come in this plastic tray, stacked next to one another, and obviously because of their metal nature, it made the paint chip. How odd, I thought. What a poorly engineered production flaw. But in hindsight, it is the total encapsulation of what Kanban EV stands for. I mentioned that Lacerda's games are complicated, but I don't think I quite got across how complicated. Out of nearly 100,000 board games listed on BoardGameGeek, On Mars, for example, is the 5th heaviest entry, heft being a colloquialism for complexity. If you discount war games and multiple editions of the same game, it is the 2nd heaviest entry. Complexity is obviously subjective. Vital himself argues that Lisboa is his most complicated title, and some people find Kanban more difficult than On Mars, even though its weight on BGG is higher. Point being that we're talking about slim margins here. If you adopt this box, it won't be an easy ride. I'm so sorry, I am getting a phone call. It's from Not That Complicated Dude. Hello? Oh, I see. Not that complicated, you say. Really? Well, thank you for your phone call. Thank you. What's wrong with these people? I really enjoyed Kanban when it came out originally in 2014, but I think that says more about my taste at the time than about the game. I was itching to review it. And then again in 2018 with the Driver's Edition re-release, which was the daftest subtitle because at no point in this game do you actually drive a car. Kanban EV standing for electric vehicle, is once again the same game, but this time with an artistic retooling. Get it? Because the art's done by Ian O'Toole. I have a creative writing degree. I'm glad I never reviewed this game. I would have gotten it so wrong. The discourse around heavy Euro games in reviews was pretty much, is this too heavy? I think it's too heavy. Games should not be this heavy. Or, nah, it's not too heavy. I like it. I like heavy. What about all these cool mechanisms? I am, of course, oversimplifying, but I know I'm not wrong because I've done this myself. But Lacerda's games were never just mechanisms, and I'd be doing our past collective reviewer scene selves a disservice if I said people weren't aware of that. We looked at it, we mentioned it, and we even talked about it. It's just that the conversation ended at, look at all these mechanisms, what do things like in the real world. That's neat and or overbearing. It's like Alan Partridge visiting an art gallery. Ever since I revisited Kanban, I couldn't help but marvel at just how many things this box holds that just sat there on the edge of my periphery for years. I could feel them, but I couldn't quite put them into words. So let's try this time. In Kanban EV, you play a middle manager working in a car factory that's being run in the Kanban management style. Since I spent a grand total of 1 day working in an office in my life, I had to look up what Kanban was. According to Wikipedia, Kanban is a lean method to manage and improve work across human systems. This approach aims to manage work by balancing demands with available capacity and by improving the handling of system-level bottlenecks. And now that none of us understand it, we can move right on. Ostensibly, Kanban EV is about making cars. You're in a car factory, you move car parts about, develop new car designs, move little car pieces around a racetrack. It's all there. In 2021, cars are a bit gauche, so this new version has electric cars because that's environmentally friendly, and there's nothing wrong with that side of the industry. Except that's obviously a lie. The game's called Kanban, not Carban. Carbon emissions. The game's called Kanban, not yay, cars! It's set in a car factory because the idea for the management style was initially developed by Toyota, so it's an homage. But the cars don't actually matter. This could be a factory that made anything. If it made computers, these would be RAM sticks. Processors, these would be computer design ideas. These would be little PlayStations and Xboxes on a conveyor belt, and that's where they go to race around the track. Which is a joke that becomes a lot less silly if you consider how much money people make just by benchmarking computers. Kanban has very little to say about cars, but it does have a lot to say about labor. And you, the middle manager, are the star of the show. In the game, you are represented by a wooden figure of your player color. Each turn, you will visit one of the game's 5 departments and do some work. At the start, you're equally inept at any of the tasks, yet you're given the keys to the factory and can do almost anything you like. Want to develop a new car design? Go ahead. Want to produce a car on the conveyor belt? Sure, press some buttons. You'll be fine. You approach Kanban with the overconfidence in your own self that's only possible in the corporate world. Naturally, you're also rewarded for it. Each round of Kanban is split into 2 phases. The board is divided by a corridor in the middle that connects all the departments. In phase 1, you'll take your figure and move it to another department, and in phase 2, you'll do some work there. The space you land on denotes how many shifts of work you get. Each shift is the equivalent of 1 action in that department. So if, for example, you land on the free shift space in the design department, that means you can spend 3 actions either taking new designs or training yourself in the department. You can spend additional bank shifts to work more if you got them, but never more than 4, because according to the game's iconography, that would be more time than exists on the clock. You can be overambitious, but not to the point it breaks the space-time continuum. Why would you ever go on a space that gives you fewer shifts? Well, maybe somebody already took the space that gives you more shifts in the design department, or maybe there's a particular design that you really want and you don't want anyone to steal it. Landing on a space that gives you fewer shifts lets you act first and yoink the design critical to your strategy. Plus, Sandra is always watching. More on her later. If you noticed a streak of competitive nature, you're in for a treat. Working with people doesn't mean liking them, and in this game, you get to properly hate on your co-workers. The co-part obviously standing in for competitors. Despite working in the same factory and having the same goals, that being more cars and more productivity, at no point are you actually deliberately helping each other. But because you do work in the same factory, the results of your work will be beneficial to others. The game is framed by you getting more production points, have the most at the end of the game, and you win. Not the factory, not the other players, you'll win. You'll manipulate outcomes in a Byzantine structure, you'll weave complex strategies, you'll outsmart and outpace your opponents, all in the name of yourself. Let me give you a broader picture of what you do in Kanban. As I mentioned, there are 5 departments in the factory. 4 of them are unique, and then there's administration, where spaces provide fewer shifts but let you work in any department of your choosing. A universal copy space. We've briefly gone over the design department, where you go and pick up new car designs. Each of them depict one of the game's 6 types of cars, that being concept, SUV, city, truck, and sports, and are then paired with one of the game's 6 car parts, that being engine, autopilot system, battery, drivetrain, body, and electronics. Talking of car parts, let's pivot to the logistics department. Here you can pick up your engine, autopilot system, battery, drivetrain, body, and electronics. Now you have a car design and or a car part. What do you do with them? Well, make cars, obviously. Except making cars in this game is neither obvious or simple. It's a multi-step process where you make cars in the assembly department by spending a car part and then once again spend a design you picked up earlier in the design department to take a car that rolled off of assembly into R&D to put into your garage. This car is now complete. Or is it? It's not upgraded yet. Bizarrely, whilst in R&D, you can also spend a design you picked up earlier to improve a part on a type of car, both of which must match the ones in the design. And then, if you have upgraded a car part for the type of car you have in your garage, that's the goal, the dream, and the productivity points. I am grossly oversimplifying this for the purpose of clarity. There are many interlocking, interweaving little steps and nuances that make the gamey parts of this system shine, but I think I got the picture across. Take designs, take parts, make cars, upgrade cars, have an Uber car in your garage, get points, win. In season 1 of the TV show The Expanse, the character Amos Burton says, "We're just caught in the churn, that's all. The only game, survival. When the jungle tears itself down and builds itself into something new, guys like you and me, we end up dead. Doesn't really mean anything. Or if we happen to live through it, well, that doesn't mean anything either." This is a cynical view of the universe, but it suits the character of Amos well. He recognizes that in the grand scheme of things, he does not matter. He'll play the game because playing the game is the only way to survive, but his choices, and the outcomes of his choices, don't affect anything on the universal scale or the human scale. The churn tears through everything in its wake. Nowhere else is this better exemplified than in Kanban, especially in Sandra, who crashes from department to department, destroying and reshaping everything like a tidal wave. Sandra is your boss, and she gives neither one nor two hoots about you. She just cares about what you've done in the service of the greater good. The greater good being the factory, of course. Your first introduction to Sandra is in the rulebook. It reads,
"So you're what I've been sent to work with. Huh. I am Sandra, the factory manager, and you will be answering to me for as long as you remain employed here."
She goes on like that for a while, equal parts corny and ominous, switching between insult to motivation in a manner where it's easy to conflate the two. You'll next encounter her on the factory floor. Just like you, she is a wooden piece in the game, and just like you, she travels from department to department. You cannot interact with her directly, but she can definitely interact with you. Worth noting that Sandra is named after Vita Lacerda's wife, and I'm sincerely not sure how I should feel about that. She'll visit each department in sequential order, starting with R&D and going downwards all the way to administration. She takes turns in corridor order, just like you do, except on her turn she'll reshape the state of each department she is in, and then she will evaluate you. All of you. When you start a game of Kanban, you can choose whether Sandra is mean or nice. By default, the 2014 version had Sandra as nice. Now she is mean unless you select the nice Sandra variant. I think it's very telling that this choice matters very little. She will respond in different ways to different things, but ultimately punishment will be extolled to those unproductive. If Sandra is mean, she'll check the person or persons least trained in her department and punish them via point reduction. If Sandra is nice, she'll check the person or persons most trained and bestow them with a point increase. Either way, the gap widens, and someone gets punished and someone gets rewarded. Once you learn the ropes of Kanban, you begin to understand how you can manipulate Sandra. If you get to choose a space before she does, you can make her skip an entire department. Oh, don't mind me, Sandra. I'm just catching up on some very important work in the, what is this? This is the assembly department. Why don't you go over here to logistics where you can see that I'm also doing. Great! On and on it goes. In these moments, Kanban is a mad bureaucratic shuffle. No one quite knows what they're doing, but they'll sure look good doing it because the churn is coming. And if we live or die through it, well, that doesn't really mean anything. A common criticism of games as art is that any message it's trying to relay is rendered meaningless because players have agency and make choices, and those choices might not correspond to that message. Film uses framing as a tool for expression. On a basic level, everything you need to see is in the frame. If you're looking at me and I am talking to you, then your attention is drawn to me and what I'm saying, but you don't see anything to the left or the right of me. There could be a drunken, pantsless clown doing cartwheels. You wouldn't know it. You certainly don't see behind the shot either, because the cameras and the lighting rigs and the Elaine directing it would ruin your suspension of disbelief. But you also don't need to. Your brain does an adequate job of filling in the rest. To subvert that, sometimes the important stuff happens outside of the frame. You don't see it, but that's the point. Board games almost always use framing. The combination of boards, cards, and pieces is your stage, a singular snapshot encapsulating the totality of the story from beginning to end. The players then are the actors and the audience. The story is being told to them and by them at the same time. But there is a problem, because in this scenario, how do you maintain a consistent, meaningful message? Some games are made with that in mind. The message is that you could do anything within the framework of the rules. Some games argue that they have no stories in them. There is a setting, but it doesn't matter. It's just there to make the process of mechanical consumption go down easy. A lubricant. Kanban is different. Not only is the setting important, but also it manages to tell a cohesive story no matter what you do. The factory has no name, no face apart from Sandra. Nothing exists outside of it, and it itself has no sense of place. You're just in a factory. It doesn't matter what its name is, just that you're here and you have a job to do. This will be a jarring pivot, but I promise you it'll make more sense as the video goes on. I'd like to talk a little bit about Christopher Robin, the 2018 film starring Ewan McGregor. Yes, you heard me right, as in Winnie the Pooh Christopher Robin, but older now. In this version, Christopher Robin has relegated his childhood adventures to fantasies he must have conjured, failing to accept them as real and abandoning them to the dusty old box of forgotten toys in the corner of his mind. He now works as a middle manager in a suitcase factory, trading precious hours of family time for overtime to satisfy the incompetence of his inept boss. We're never explicitly told what happened to Christopher Robin, what made him lose his innocence and childlike wonder and become this shell of a man, a suitcase, if you will. The film is made by Disney and marketed for families, but at the beginning there's brief mention of Christopher Robin going to World War II, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions here. Most of the film's plot revolves around Christopher Robin having a simultaneous crisis both at work and at home. The two axes of his life crash, and so he unwillingly retreats away from both of them, only to find out that Winnie, Piglet, Owl, and so on are indeed very much real, and this isn't a breakdown. This is him rediscovering his lost self. And then, right at the very end of the film, all the loose threads weave together into a whole. Christopher was tasked with coming up with a new business proposal, something to save the failing suitcase industry. Throughout the film, he tries, yet never succeeds, to put anything together. He clings to his paperwork to save his job and the jobs of everyone he manages, yet we as the audience know that the paperwork will never save him because there's nothing there. He arrives at the meeting with nothing to show for himself, and that's when he finally gets it. None of it matters. He rediscovered himself not whilst at work, but whilst having a break. A holiday. And what do people need when they go on holiday? suitcases. Impromptu, he pitches a new plan. Don't fire anyone. In fact, give them a holiday. Also, slash the cost of the suitcases the factory makes. Make them out of cheaper material. More people will go on holiday, more people will be able to afford suitcases, and your own workers who make the suitcases will buy the suitcases. The end. If this sounds familiar, that's because it actually happened. Not Winnie the Pooh, obviously, but this particular business plan. In 1914, Henry Ford, in a controversial move, increased the minimum daily wage in his factories from $2.34 to $5. And then again in 1926, he established the 5-day, 40-hour working week that we're so familiar with. Many of you probably know that Ford wasn't exactly what one would call a stand-up guy. Hitler was famously a fan of his and had a life-size picture of him in his office. Henry Ford was outspokenly anti-Semitic, and also he wasn't much concerned with the welfare of his workers, to the point where he created a fake union just to get his workers to join to think that they are in a union. A trap within a trap. So a move like that might seem uncharacteristically progressive of him. Getting paid a bare minimum of $5 was a much better gig than anywhere else in Detroit. Getting holiday time on top of that was just gravy. Why work anywhere else? Henry Ford attracted the best of the best in terms of labor, and more importantly, they were loyal to him. And what did these loyal employees do with their spare time and money? Went on holiday in Ford cars that they bought, putting the money they earned from Ford back into Ford. It was a circular loop, a closed economy. This ending to Christopher Robin dislodged something inside of me. I couldn't reconcile how a film about Winnie the Pooh and healing of trauma could tie itself with a conclusion that was Ford propaganda in a trench coat. The CGI was just a coat of paint. Scratch it away, and something else lurks inside. There is no reason for you to make these cars. There's no reason for this factory to make these cars because they never leave. There's no outside market that buys them. Just put them in your garage and there they sit. You never get paid in Kanban, nor is there any actual economy. Your only rewards are productivity points, that being your measure in the eyes of the factory, or training manuals, which help productivity, or banked shifts, which just lets you work more. Toil is rewarded with more toil. There is no outside of this factory, no outside of this frame. You can bounce and bob between complex strategies and machinations, but the end result is always the same. Cars get made. More and more you get the sense that your own greed, your will, are not there to help you survive and navigate the churn. They are the things that power it. It's not so much a system, it's an engine. And the fuel in this engine, the only thing that's needed to keep it going is you. You have been accounted for. Your ambition predicted. You cannot escape this frame. You cannot escape Kanban. You could say that this is just my interpretation of it, that I extracted meaning from the mechanisms, and this isn't a scathing critique of latter-day capitalism via a winding rat maze. You could say that this is just a po-faced simulation of the Kanban management style that accidentally blunders into a comprehensive critique of itself. You could do that, and it might even be true, but you'd be weakening this game as a whole. And more importantly, does that even matter? Should we even be concerned with authorial intent? Does that make the setting of this game more interesting? I look at the game's art, the new art from Ian O'Toole, not the French mime who crashed into a paint shop version from 2014, and I think there's no way any of this is a coincidence. The colors are clean, clinical, sterile. That's how I imagine a modern corporate lobby looking like. Something that says, hey, we're playful, we've got style, but we're clearly dead inside. I probed Ian a little bit about this. When I mentioned how Sandra looms over everyone in meetings, with you literally represented as faceless, he remarked, yep, that's mostly because I had to attend design production meetings every Wednesday for 6 years and I hated it, but in an Irish accent. So on some level, both me and Ian see this game as the same. but not all of it. There's no way our interpretations are identical. But I'll tell you what though, my interpretation, and I'll bet his as well, became much richer after we talked to each other about it. Oh, and meetings. How could I forget meetings? Another reward you get in the game on top of bank shifts and training manuals are speech bubbles. This is the only way you're allowed to express yourself. Your only vocal contribution is, hey, look at me. I did this. 2 or 3 times in any given game, meetings will happen. This is where you'll play cards that depict things you have or haven't achieved. And if you have achieved them and you have a speech bubble, you can pipe up about it and get more points. Crucially, once a meeting is finished, you can even pitch a new card towards the next meeting. This will be something that everyone is evaluated against. In a 4-player game, these cards will be solely contributed by all players. That's neat. A source of agency. Together, our will is steering this monolithic beast. And then you go back to making cards again. You're not steering this, you're just earning productivity points. And the factory keeps being a factory. It makes cars. So yeah, I do think a lot of this is intentional, some coincidental, and some probably just me reading into it too much, which is great. I love that Kanban has the scope for me to read into too much. Not many games do. And then, even if so much of this is deliberate, were the cars purposely placed in this plastic container so they would chip against themselves? If yes, that is some next level Mr. Lacerda. I do think Kanban is meant to pose a question though. What does work mean to you? What are you getting out of it? Are the rewards worth it? If you expect an answer from this video or from Kanban, then you are barking up the wrong tree. Neither I nor this game can anticipate what work means to you. It depends on so many factors, and very few of them take your happiness into account. If your work is meaningful to you, congratulations! You are either blissfully unaware or you achieved that which so many of us seek. Either way, a success. But even then, you can probably recall a past moment in your life that Kanban reflects. Even then, Kanban can ask you, what do you get out of work? Is it money? Because there's none in this game. Is it a moral reward? Because you're making cars for a world that doesn't need or ask for more. I can't escape the fact that I'm a board game reviewer, and despite my best efforts to shun convention, I still have to return to one of our tropes. People watch me for purchasing advice, and I can sure imagine some of you watching this video and going, wow, this sounds amazing. I sure would like to experience it for myself. Great. That will be £120. And if you recall somewhere at the start of this video, I called this a headache in a box. It is mind-numbingly intricate, purposely labyrinthine, and simulationist to a fault. If you don't mind spending that much money to own an art installation that says one thing and one thing only, then go right ahead, my friend. Go right ahead. Just remember, if you find yourself experiencing something overly long, laboriously elaborate, and windingly circular, maybe, just maybe, that was the point all along.